Good morning, everybody. Welcome to The Skinny for Friday, January 23rd, 2026. My name is Ray Roa. I'm the editor-in-chief at Creative Loafing Tampa Bay. Once again, holding the studio down this morning is my co-host and show co-founder, Mitch Perry, is exiled in Tallahassee, covering the 60-day legislative session that kicked off this month. Returning in the studio this week, Valerie Smith, editor-in-chief at the Bay Area Sapphic Sun publication, a member of the Tampa Bay Journalism Project, of which WMNF News also participates. Valerie, thank you for coming back 2 weeks in a row.
Thanks for having me back on, Ray.
And on the show today, we will hear from Jason Scott and Marley Price from the Dump Duke movement, as well as Randy Knight, city manager of Winter Park, which started running its own utility in 2025. But right now, we are joined via Zoom from Tallahassee by Mitch Perry, co-founder of The Skinny, as I said, and senior reporter for the Florida Phoenix. More than a wellness check. Mitch, how you doing up there?
Hey, good morning, Ray. How are you?
Great. Mitch, the Florida House is moving really fast on a bunch of bills up there. Is there anything left to write about?
Yeah, there is. And actually, let's start out today's review of the past week in Tallahassee, not by talking about legislation, but by a legal opinion that Attorney General James Othmeyer offered on Monday on Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. He sent out an opinion basically saying that there's about roughly 80 state laws aimed at protecting minority employees and businesses that he says are no longer valid now. Okay, so basically, we don't need them anymore. He wrote, these laws violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. He wrote, Florida laws requiring race-based state action are presumptively unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. So yesterday in the Capitol at the Rotunda at noon, all the Black Democratic lawmakers held a press conference basically blasting him for this. And what was most interesting, actually, is one senator, Mac Bernard out of South Florida, he said that Governor DeSantis should fire Othmeyer for this because he said this is what he did with Andrew Warren back in 2022, right? We covered that so extensively over the last few years, Ray. And it is interesting. I went back today. I'm writing something about this today. So when Ron DeSantis back in August of 22 announced that he was suspending Andrew Warren, let me try to make sure do I have it here somewhere? I do. I'm going to find my notes here. But basically, yeah, this is what he said. He said, he's talking about the state attorney. He said the role of the state attorney is to apply and enforce the law, not pick and choose which laws you like and which laws you don't like. This is a law and order state. We're not going to back down from that 1 inch. We're not going to allow locally elected people to veto what our state has decreed through our legislative process. So what Othmeyer has basically said is all the state laws that are in place at this moment, I'm not going to enforce. I don't believe in. Now, there are a couple of legislative proposals that would do away with some of what, is in state law right now. And what the Democrats were saying yesterday is they don't want these lawmakers to pursue that this year. One of these bills is SB 1662 filed by Stan McClain out of Ocala. That would prohibit executive government agencies from using racial or gender preferences or quotas when making certain decisions. There's another bill, 1189 by Judson Sapp, Republican from Green Cove Springs. I'm not sure where that is. His bill would remove provisions requiring the governor to consider appointees to certain commissions reflecting Florida's racial, ethnic, and gender diversity. So basically affirmative action kind of laws, right? And I know we've heard the U.S. Supreme Court say basically these are not needed anymore, like with college admissions. And maybe some people, people think that we don't need these anymore in state government. And that's something I guess that has to be decided. But Othmeyer, what he did is basically say unilaterally declare, I'm not going to enforce them. And so I do think that there was a parallel to saying that what he did is beyond even what Andrew Warren was accused of back in the summer of 2022. If you remember, Ray, Andrew Warren had talked about not going after on abortion cases, people who violate, doctors who were going to be in violation of the law at that time, the 15-week abortion law, and I believe also against gender-affirming care cases, right? So that is, something to be watching out for as we go on. And by the way, I think it was definitely provocative that Othmeyer released this on MLK Jr. holiday, right? And he also did it. He wasn't by himself. Ken Paxton, the attorney general in Texas, did basically a similar legal opinion also on MLK Day. So we're seeing a lot of this from the federal government. As you know, I think Tampa no longer has their WIMBY program anymore because
that's correct.
It's a violation, right, of what Trump's executive order is on DEI programs. So that is something to watch out for.
Mitch, a question about that. I mean, you're up in Tallahassee all the time, talking with lawmakers. This is a lame duck year for Ron DeSantis. I don't know what James Uthmire's, agenda and future looks like here, but how tired are other legislators who have spent so much time there with other governors? Do you get the sense that they're kind of fed up with this kind of game that we're playing here?
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, you're right. Uthmire is being the more aggressive one here. James Uthmire is on the ballot in November. He has not been elected to anything, right? He was appointed by DeSantis a year ago to replace Ashley Moody, who was replacing Marco Rubio in the U.S. Senate. So Uthmire, I think, is doing a lot of these things to get himself in the news, frankly. Going back to DeSantis, the governor, by the way, was in Idaho yesterday. He was meeting up there with some folks about, I think, the term limit law, one of the things that he's trying to push on a national basis. I think somebody wrote yesterday on Twitter that he's met more with the leaders in Idaho than he has with the leaders in Tallahassee, the Republicans up here, Senate President Al Britton and House Speaker Danny Perez. Hey, speaking of that, okay, let's talk also about property taxes again, because sure. I'm going to keep on talking about this because this is so dramatic if, in fact, we go ahead and it gets before the voters, either reducing, substantially or getting rid of all property taxes. So there was another hearing yesterday in Tallahassee on this. A second bill is basically passed through all committees in the House and is going straight to the floor now in the next few weeks. This would be a bill that would phase out all property taxes, $100,000 a year. Basically give everybody a $100,000 exemption for up to 10 years. And with the average price of a Florida home being roughly $350,000, it would kick in really in 3 to 4 years. And we heard from a lot of county commissioners, actually some from the Tampa Bay area, Jack Mariano from Pasco County, George Cruz from Manatee County, Republicans, I should note, who say this would be disastrous. And we heard a lot of information about what this is going to do to their local budgets. And I think that, interestingly, is that what we don't know yet, Ray, is that there's been no Senate proposals, right? And so is this going to be actually done at all in the session, or is it going to be kicked down for a special session later on this year? We don't know that at this point.
And in a way, some of the criticisms of this phase-out plan is that it does pass the buck to a future legislature and doesn't really solve these problems right now. And then you guys Florida Phoenix reported on this poll that said, I think 63% of Floridians actually just want property insurance relief instead. But here we are talking about a phase-out plan and all this stuff and not really having hard discussions about insurance and going to bat for voters against insurance companies. How much of that are you feeling up there?
Yeah, well, this is what Republicans say that they're dealing with the affordability issue, which has become the key buzzword in American politics this year.
Thanks, Mamdani.
Yes, exactly, and deservedly so. So, what are the Republicans in Tallahassee doing about the affordability issue? This is what they're now saying is what they're doing about it, which is we're going to give property tax relief for Floridians. And I think that the dollar figure I heard. I want to be careful about this. Maybe I shouldn't throw it out there. They threw a number out what the average homeowner in Pinellas County would be saving annually. And they also mentioned Miami-Dade. I think they're talking a couple thousand in Pinellas, maybe over 3,000 in Miami-Dade. So, right. And look, to be fair, obviously, property taxes are heavy for X amount of property owners in the state. And, I think people would get a break. So, again, we don't know, what's going to be ultimately approved by the legislature. And then yesterday, I did think it was interesting because some of these Republicans on this committee I was observing yesterday morning, they were then saying, hey, it's still going to go to the voters, which is true, right? This is going to be the constitutional, if in fact, whatever gets approved in Tallahassee will go on a ballot in November. So nothing is done for sure until the voters, and 60% of the voters do that. And so a lot is going to happen between, we're only in mid-January until November. But Ray, we'll be talking about this a lot, on the Skinny throughout the next few months, because if in fact something like this happens, It's going to be very dramatic. I don't think that, these are Cassandras bellowing, falsely that a disaster is happening here. I think this is going to be serious. No state has ever gotten rid of property taxes, from what I understand. Okay. As you know, we don't have, income taxes here. So, where's the revenue coming from? All right.
And we could really get into regressive taxes and all that stuff, but that's a whole show.
Okay. One other thing I want to mention to you is another bill that I covered this week. It's called the Promoting Work Deterring Fraud Act of 2026, and it's Senate Bill 216, sponsored by again Stan McClain from Ocala. And the thing about this, Ray, so I think some of our listeners, hopefully, they haven't had to go through this, but our state unemployment compensation program is considered one of the worst in the country. I think that's a fair statement, and certainly is in terms of how generous or not it is. I think the most you can really get is something like $275 a week at most. And you can only get it for roughly 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. There's some changes in that depending on where the unemployment rate is, but that's roughly what it is. And we all remember during COVID how the system broke down, right? It was an absolute mess. And it's just a very hard system to even get into. People say that when Governor Rick Scott was the governor, they really did change this program that makes it very hard for people who just qualify for it and need it to actually get it. Okay, so it's a tough situation as it is right now, but this bill that's moving through the legislature would make it even harder for folks who unfortunately lose their job and need to get unemployment benefits. This basically would require, the Department of Commerce to disqualify people claiming unemployment benefits if they find that the individual failed without good cause to contact the required number of prospective employers per week, which is, I believe in current law, is 5 employers per week you have to do. It also says if you appear on 3 or more occasions for a job interview without notifying the employer of the need to cancel or reschedule, so somehow you miss 3 different job interviews within a year, you'll be thrown off. And if you refuse to,
if you have to return to employment when recalled, right?
Yeah,
and then there's this report that claims that the department had prevented $32 billion in attempted fraud.
Yeah, that is, by the way, that is
report,
where
right?
did this come from? Think about that. I mean, if they prevented $1 billion in fraud, that's laudable, and that's a lot of money. 32 billion. This came out last year. I found it in a story looking this up. A TV station in Florida reported this, and yet nobody knows where this came from.
Yes.
And I actually reached out to the Department of Commerce 2 days ago, and I asked them, can you verify this? And they could not. And but we're hearing it's like, because, why do we need this, right? Again, a lot of people would argue we need to make the system better for people. I don't know whether you have to have more benefits, but simply not make it a little less onerous. And in fact, but this would be, businesses pay taxes for this, right? They do pay a tax into this. So this would be, I guess, a break for businesses. Also, it was mentioned that there are over 400,000 people, there are over 400,000 jobs that are listed throughout the state right now. And there's roughly 30,000 people who are getting unemployment. So somehow, they should be able to take those jobs right now. Really, I guess the point being, nobody should be on unemployment, which ideally nobody would be on unemployment, right? Nobody wants to be, certainly. It's not a great thing in Florida. This bill, though, would make it harder. And it's like, why? I mean, why are we doing this? So that is something that also I covered this week.
Right on. Mitch Perry, checking in from Tallahassee. Mitch is the senior reporter at the Florida Phoenix. Mitch, thanks for making time for us. I hope we can keep doing this as the session gets going for you, and we'll do it as much as we can. Glad to hear your voice.
Absolutely.
Talk to you next week.
Okay, take care.
So guys, I wanted to start the show with that Snap song, I've Got the Power, and that's because we've got Valerie Smith, editor-in-chief at Sapphic Sun here, contributor to CL, working a story about a grassroots movement to dump Duke or leave St. Petersburg's longtime energy provider when this 30-year franchise agreement between the two parties expires this summer. Joining us in the studio today are Jason Scott and Marley Price from the Dump Duke movement. Jason, Marley, welcome to The Skinny. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And here via Zoom is kind of a legend in that world, Randy Knight, city manager of Winter Park, municipality that just north of Orlando, started running its own utility in 2025. Randy, thanks for joining us here today.
Good morning, Ray.
And Valerie, I know you tried to get somebody from Duke Energy or the Pinellas Energy Alliance here.
Yes, we did try to get somebody from Duke Energy and a representative from the Pinellas Energy Alliance, a group which has been spreading a lot of information opposing municipal-owned electric utilities that has some connections to Duke. We'll discuss that a little later in the show, but we were unable to get a pro-Duke voice on the show today despite our best efforts. We did get a statement from Ronald Brise, a former member of the Florida Public Service Commission, which we will read when we get further into the show. But I will be taking the place of all of these pro-Duke voices and reading some information, some literature that's been provided to us.
Yeah, so these complaints about power companies, they're not uncommon, but the grievances with Duke Energy, which has more than a century, I think it's like 125 years or something, providing power to St. Pete going back to its days as St. Petersburg Electric Light and Power, led to a 5-3 vote last August. And that vote called on St. Pete Mayor Ken Welch to seek bids for a feasibility study evaluating the pros and cons of leaving Duke and forming a municipal utility, something that 33 other communities now do in Florida. We should note that Mayor Welch did work for Florida Power Corporation, which later became Duke, and has agreed to exploring dumping Duke, but has also pitched an idea to extend the agreement with the utility by a decade when it expires this summer. Jason and Marley, how do we get to this point in your movement, and what does it look like when you're knocking on doors right now?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And when we're knocking on doors, we're usually met with people that are equally frustrated with Duke Energy. They have bills that are extremely high. We have historic rates just this month. They've highest in the state, but also highest in history this month in January. So there's a lot of frustration in the community. And how we got here is that we have a 30-year agreement in St. Pete with Duke Energy, and that is finally coming up in August, like you said. And after a historic hurricane season too in 2024, we started looking into it, and that is kind of how Jason and I started working together. And he has a bit more of a technical background, so he can talk a little bit more to that.
Yeah, and by the way, if you are listening and you are a Duke Energy customer, it would be pretty cool to hear what your bill is. We won't say your name, but maybe you could tell us the neighborhood that you're in. Send us a text, 813-433-0885. If you're a Duke Energy customer in St. Petersburg or Clearwater, cool with that. Let us know what you're paying each month for Duke. Tell us what neighborhood you're in, and I'll read them out here. We won't read your name or anything like that. So send us a text with your Duke Energy bill total every month, 813-433-0885. Jason, as Marley was saying, you're kind of the technical guy here. How do you get involved with this movement and why? And this deadline in August is coming quick. What's it been like for you knocking on doors and meeting people?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Marley said, with the agreement coming up to expire, I found out that there was a group looking into this. I know Richie Floyd raised this question back and I think
it's the District 8 Councilman.
Yes.
Yep.
Councilman Richie Floyd brought it up back in 2024, I believe, and that raised my my interest in the subject as well.
I ain't gonna lie, this is the craziest.
My background is in utility planning, so this is more or less in my field, and so I reached out and got in touch with Marley, and we've been working on this campaign ever since. When going door to door, it's quite easy to talk and explain our options coming up with the expiration of this agreement. And really, we have a lot of positive feedback. We don't really have any major negative feedback when talking to residents. At most, which might be like 1 out of 10, folks just say, well, we don't like the city of St. Pete and how they operate. But for 90%, I think we have very positive feedback.
And Randy, I want to bring you in here and ask you about the program you have going at Winter Park. I know there are a lot of great things to say about it. You told Mitch Perry that as of last May, your rates were 32% lower than Duke Energy's, 2% lower than the statewide average for municipal utilities. You've also buried 80% of the power lines in the ground over the past 20 years, which that's a huge deal when you're talking about storm recovery. Our community here knows very well about trying to get power back up. But in Winter Park, the city's voters approved this split from Progress Energy, which later merged with Duke Energy. Best you can you take us back to 2005 and the push for the city to take control of its utility? What do you remember from that time?
Sure, I'd be glad to. It actually goes back to to the end of 2000 and the beginning of 2001 when our 30-year franchise was expiring. And basically, Duke Energy, I'm going to use Duke, even though it was Florida Power Corp at the time. It's just simpler. But Duke Energy approached the city, as it did the other 105 cities that had franchise agreements in the state of Florida, trying to renew them. And they wanted to renew a 30-year franchise. And in our agreement, we had a right to purchase at the end of the franchise term, which was January 2001. And the franchise they were proposing, they took out that clause that said the city had the right to purchase at the end of the franchise. So in our mind, it was more of a permanent franchise. So our city commission said, well, I think we better do a feasibility study, much the same as you're talking about here today. And so we had, I found it interesting, you said that the mayor used to work for Duke Energy there. We had the same situation. Our mayor at the time worked for Duke Energy. And so we had a split commission. We had two commissioners that wanted to explore buying it. And we had two commissioners that wanted to sign a new franchise, and the mayor was conflicted out and couldn't vote. So we were kind of at a stalemate. And fortunately, our reliability problems were legendary here. And we had one commissioner that wanted to sign a new franchise that basically said to Duke, if you'll guarantee you're going to improve reliability, I'll keep pushing for a new franchise. And they said, we can't promise you that. And so she flipped over to the other side. We went forward with the feasibility study, which of course showed, in our case, it was a financially feasible thing to do. And so that really started the process.
By the way, I should mention that people are starting to text. I have a text here out of Pinellas, $313 a month on average. That's a 2,000 square foot house in the city of Seminole. And then another text says, my electric bill is now $928 this month. I have a 1,600 foot square house, 3-bedroom. This is crazy. We really need to do something about this. So we're inviting our listeners to text us their Duke Energy costs here. Let us know what part of the what neighborhood you're in. And if you can, let us know how big your home is. The number to text is 813-433-0885. But Randy, we'll have another question here for you.
Randy, St. Pete and Winter Park are very different cities. And there are a lot of pro-Duke voices who are saying this isn't really a valid comparison when people try to bring up Winter Park. Winter Park is smaller, and as I understand, you had the right to purchase in your existing franchise agreement, which I don't believe St. Pete or Clearwater currently have, so it would be maybe a more protracted legal battle. What parallels can you see between the campaigns, and do you at all refute the idea that it's not a valid comparison?
I think it is a valid comparison. I've seen some of the comments made by the incumbent utility, and it was the same exact arguments they were making against Winter Park buying it. You don't know what you're doing. You've never run an electric utility. You're going to be on your own if there's a storm. Your rates are going to go up. I mean, all of those things were said. The one promise they made that came true was it is an expensive process. They said it was going to be an expensive process, and it is. The legal battles will be fierce. A little city like Winter Park, we spent $3 million in legal and consulting fees going through this process. So that part is true. And
regarding it being a similar sort of campaign and similar talking points, ahead of the show, you actually did send me an article from the early 2000s by this industry news site, the Energy Central, and it's 10 tools to fight takeovers. And there's a pretty clearly outlined sort of process for fighting the municipalizing of electric grids. So could you talk a little bit more about that playbook that's being used by these electric companies?
Sure. It was, I think, originally put out by the Edison Institute. And basically it goes through all the ways you defeat municipalization. You're starting with being involved in the community, sponsor every charity golf tournament, be the president of the Chamber of Commerce, get involved. And you see all these feel-good ads on TV for your electric utility. And you ask yourself, they're a monopoly in our community. Why do they need to advertise? Well, this is why they do it. They want you to love them when this issue comes up because, you don't have a choice. And this is the only time in a 30-year window that you have a choice of who you want to be your electric utility. So they're going to pull out all the stops. I mentioned earlier there were 106 franchises in the state of Florida. Winter Park was the only one that didn't sign a new franchise. There were about 10 other cities at the time that really looked hard at doing what we were doing. Some of them were ahead of us. And one of the things that the utilities do is they get involved in the local elections. They try to make sure that anybody opposed to their viewpoint gets unelected in the next election cycle. And that's what happened with most of the cities around us. Fortunately, in Winter Park, it did not happen. We kept the same commissioners, and they stuck to their guns. But yeah, they argued the debt issue that I've seen. Is going to. I think I heard the number $1 billion of debt over there. In our case, they were saying it was going to cost us $100 million to buy the utility. Our feasibility study said it was going to be about $15 million. After arbitration, it ended up being about $43 million. So it was kind of a split the baby type of situation. We went back and did another feasibility study, and it showed even at $43 million, this makes sense. So that's, kind of where we were.
And by the way, if you're just joining us, the voice you're hearing belongs to Randy Knight. He's the city manager of Winter Park, a municipality just north of Orlando, which started running its own utility in 2025. We're discussing, 2005. Sorry, Randy. We're discussing the Dump Duke movement, which is trying to wrestle control of utilities away from Duke Energy in Pinellas County. You guys are texting us your bills here. I'm trying to keep up with them. So the next one is my bill used to be about 10 years ago, no more than $280 on the hot summer months while we had the AC blasting, but now it's insane. Our neighbors got solar and they charge them more for having solar, which is insane. They had to pay $60,000 for their infrastructure and still have an electric bill of $240 a month. What was the point? Used to be they would pay you for electricity on solar and it would off balance the nighttime use. Now it costs so much they wish they never did it. And if you turn off the electricity, the city can condemn your home. How is this legal? They are holding us hostage. So thanks for that text there. We have another text. My recent bill for a two-person home under 1,000 square foot apartment was $98, but during the summer it was $170 plus. And they say, let's dump Duke. We are inviting our listeners, Duke Energy customers, to text us their bills. How much are you paying every month? Tell us how big your dwelling is, what part of the county that you're in. The number to send a text is 813-433-0885. You can also call us and join the conversation, 813-239-9663. We're taking emails at dj@wmnf.org. We do have a question from Lisa here, who I'll try to bring on the air. Lisa, are you there? Let's see. We can't get her on here, but we will work on that.
So I found that text that we got really interesting, saying that Duke, is charging people for solar, because one of the big talking points of these pro-Duke people is that when you switch to municipal control, it can put you behind in the race to get renewable, environmentally friendly energy. So I think that's a really interesting point. And while we're talking about these pro-Duke groups, I want to highlight one which has been spreading a lot of information. We have the Clearwater Energy Alliance and the St. Pete Energy Alliance. So both of these groups operate in under the Pinellas Energy Alliance, which is a 501c6 group that tends to be industry lobbyists and things like that. It's hard to track where their money comes from, where their money goes. And what I'm seeing here is that this group in particular doesn't have many individuals listed that are affiliated with it. The only one listed is on SunBiz is Lisa Lose. She was the registered incorporator for the Pinellas Energy Alliance, the pro-Duke group. And while the Alliance can't be here today and has not responded to any of my questions, I was able to get in touch with Lisa Los, who said that she was not able to comment on any of this, not at liberty to discuss anything. And I can't 100% tie down a connection to Duke, but Lisa Los is identified as a former employee of Progress Energy Florida, who later merged with Duke. And some LinkedIn profiles that are linked to Lisa Los also identify her as a manager at Duke Energy. And again, she's the only public name tied with this. The only other name associated is CT Corporation System, which is a popular company used by large and some small businesses alike to manage the creation and incorporation of this sort of group. All of Duke Energy's and corporations in Florida also use CT Corporation System. Jason and Marley, can you talk a little bit more about Clearwater Energy Alliance, St. Pete Energy Alliance, and what we've seen coming out of their sort of leaflets and canvassing?
Yeah, so we started getting sent their ads back in November and started kind of sounding the alarm, trying to get some coverage around it, because it is worrying when the large utilities start doing this. We have seen this play out across the country, in Maine and California, where the utility starts feeling threatened and they start spending large sums of money. And where the money is coming from, anyone's guess. But like most of the money that the utilities get, it's coming from ratepayers. So it's very likely it's our money that is being spent on this. So we started seeing that there were ads being run nonstop, mostly on Instagram, YouTube, Google, things like that. Started looking into more on who was running the ads, who was behind them. The Meta ads specifically were being tied back to like a fancy consulting firm in California, which was interesting. So we started seeing those connections, and that it was all alarming to see.
Randy, let me ask you, last September, I get all these press releases and stuff, and Duke said it was going to lower bills for residential customers, a reduction largely due to the removal of the storm cost recovery charge associated with the hurricane response. But I think at this point, consumers are getting really used to their electric bills kind of going up and down. Maybe there's a decision in Tallahassee or there's some kind of rate change. It just seems like it fluctuates so much, and we're talking about that. Can you talk about whether or how much switching to city-owned utilities has stabilized the cost of power, or are you guys still having to kind of go up and down and adjust how much people are paying over there?
Well, there is some up and down, and that's all based on the fuel cost. If gas prices go up, electric bills go up, and vice versa. But I do want to put it in perspective, because Ray was talking about and asked listeners to send in their bills. There are 32 municipal utilities in the state of Florida and 5 investor-owned utilities. Winter Park is the 6th lowest rate utility in the state of Florida, and as you mentioned earlier, Duke Energy is the highest out of those 37 utilities that we benchmark with. Our rate for a 1,000 kilowatt customer is $114 a month. Duke Energy's rate for a 1,000 kilowatt customer is $185 a month. So that's $72 a month more for the same service. And if you take it up to a 2,500 kilowatt customer, which is 2.5 times that amount, ours is $311 a month, and Duke Energy's $479 a month. So when they say your rates are going to go up if you municipalize, it could. Over the 20 years we've owned the utility, there's probably been 2 years where our rates were higher than theirs. But other than that, we've pretty much had better rates. And the interesting thing about that is we're taking the profits of the system and putting it into undergrounding our system. And as Ray mentioned earlier, we're about 83% underground right now. And in the last hurricanes, our outages were very minimal. It was only in that small amount of overhead we still have. And so the ability for a municipal to use the profit of the system, and I know we don't like calling it profits, but that margin for what the community wants to use it for, whether that's green energy, whether that's undergrounding, or whether that's lowering rates, the community gets to decide. And so that's the advantage.
And Randy, I know we only have you for about 5 more minutes. I'm going to try to get some phone calls in. Lisa's been waiting, and she has a question about your power lines in Winter Park. Lisa, you're on the air.
Hi, good morning. I'd like to know if Winter Park and even Key West or another city you mentioned, I think maybe Tallahassee, they did they own the power lines when they took over the energy service? Because in Pinellas County, we don't own the power lines, and Duke Power is saying they're not for sale, and and we can't afford to buy them even if they were for sale. I don't know, something to that effect.
Okay.
So I just want to know if that's a similar situation in other cities. And one other thing, too. Duke Power is, in the country, they rate 47 out of 52 in their rebate program. It's a really bad rebate program that they could improve. And many people... the reason their power bills are so high is because their air conditioning unit is so old and it's just not efficient. But people can't afford, or they don't realize, and they don't install a new HVAC system. So the inefficiency is another reason why their bills are high. So we could do a lot more about helping people to could maybe, or the government, about helping people to be able to afford a new HVAC system.
Absolutely,
Okay.
Lisa. Absolutely.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for the call.
Randy, we got you for another couple minutes here. So can we ask you about that question of why did Winter Park own their power lines when this process started?
Right. We did not own the power lines. They were owned by Duke Energy. And there's 3, basic components of an electric utility. You got the generation that creates the power. You have the transmission that brings that power to the local substations. And then from the substation to the customer is the distribution part of the system. And so what we did was we had to acquire the distribution part of the system. We don't generate electricity. We buy it from others, and it gets transmitted over, in our case, Duke Energy transmission lines to get it to our community. But we now own, after the purchase, the distribution system, and that's what we paid. Basically the $43 million for was to acquire the poles and wires and the customers of that system.
And we should definitely talk about that with Jason Marley here, because they're going to close the show with us. But I have more calls here, Randy, and I think they might be for you. Bob from Port Richey has been waiting for a while. Bob, you're on the air on WMNF.
Okay, this will be a quick one. I sell blinds for a living, and I'm in a lot of people's homes. And these old people, older than me, I'm 73, older than me, are being talked into putting new windows in their homes. This lady put in new windows in her home, cost her almost $60,000. And the guy that sold them to her said, "Oh, no, you're going to make that back. She's going to be dead 10 years before she even begins to come out ahead of the payments that she's making on that." Another thing is we put a new air conditioner in our house. We got 680 square foot, Duke Energy. Our bill is over $200 a month, and it's ridiculous. Another thing is they're putting solar panels on these people's roofs, and they don't even tell them, you're going to have to change your roof like in a couple of years because it's over 20 years old. So they got to have somebody come up there and take them down, put a new roof on, and then they have them put the thing, and then they end up having leaks in their roof.
All right.
This is happening all the time.
Thanks for the call.
It's terrible what's going on. All I'm telling everybody is anything that's advertised on TV, like don't forget the cookie, that guy, do not buy from anybody that can afford to advertise on television.
All right. Thank you so much for the call.
$10,000 for a half a minute spot on TV. If they got that kind of money, they're making lots of money.
Thanks, Bob.
That's all I got to say.
Thanks for the call. And Randy, I know you got to go, but maybe we can sneak in one more call here. William from St. Petersburg has been waiting for a long time.
Hello, am I in the air?
Yes, sir. You're on the air, William.
Oh, thank you. The gentleman before me said it's ridiculous. Well, you know what's really ridiculous is not having any power for 5 days like we did during the hurricane. To me, that's ridiculous. And I'm going to tell you right now, everybody, when we have power, we can pick and choose who we want. But you don't miss the water till the well's gone, and I did not miss the electric until it was gone.
It sounds like you...
Back then, when we had no power, and I had nothing, okay, I was walking around with a candle at night, I mean, it was like I was ready to sign up for Tiller the Hunt Electric Company. I didn't care who I was going to deal with. I just wanted power. That's all I wanted. And now that we have power freely, everybody's saying, I don't like this, I don't like that, this is ridiculous. You know what? We ought to be glad we have power, whoever is willing to deal with us. And that's all I got to say, because we've all dealt with the power outage, and it's not pretty.
Absolutely. And we've heard stories. Thank you for your call. We've heard stories from Randy already about the reliability increase that they faced after they switched from Duke to sort of deal with this these winds that we are often battered with here in these coastal cities, as well as Winter Park's more inland city. And Jason and Marley, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the reliability increase that could potentially come from a switch from
And
Duke
Randy,
Energy.
if you've got to go, totally understand. I know you had to leave at 11:45 for us, so.
Yeah. Thank you very much for
Have a
having
great
me
day.
on your
Randy
show.
Knight, city manager of Winter Park, a municipality just north of Orlando, which started running its own utility in 2005. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.
See ya.
Yeah. So when it comes to reliability, like Winter Park has done, they have reinvested back into their grid locally rather than exporting that revenue outside of their city. So when it comes to reliability, we look at SAIDI, which is your average minutes interrupted. And back in 2024, just because 2025 is not released yet, Duke Energy was around 75 minutes.
75 minutes interrupted on average per customer over the year.
Correct. Whereas Winter Park is closer in the 35 to 25 range.
So that's a huge increase in reliability that Winter Park has, and they attribute that to burying their lines underground, which is something that Clearwater would have the ability to do if they purchased the transmission lines from Duke.
And by the way, if you're just joining us, that voice you heard belongs to Jason Scott. He's here along with Marley Price from the Dump Duke Movement. We're talking about Clearwater and St. Pete trying to take control of their own utilities and very consequential summer. You guys are texting up a storm right now. Somebody says, when I was a Duke Energy customer in Orlando, we had a budget billing plan that ended up charging us $1,000 when we moved in. In what world is that even sensible? You people are stealing money from the paychecks of hardworking people. And continuing down this line here, another person in Pinellas says, I don't find making the power grid underground an improvement. The power grid is more efficient overhead, at least I would believe. Why go underground? I think maybe we should revisit that after reading another text here. Another person from Pinellas says, we updated to a new mini split system to lower. We all have new appliances, state-of-the-art, and a tankless water heater. We all have energy-efficient AC units systems that was updated a year ago to try and lower the bills. We put in new insulation to try and help as well. We don't want to spend what could be our savings on electric bills, and that's obviously a lot of upgrades that are also expensive. And I'll read one more text, and there's more. I will try to get to all of them. Instead of having the old 4-ton unit, we switched to mini splits to only cool the places. I think that's the same person. Let's go to Jason and Mark. That was a lot there, right? One, buy all these new appliances is an argument, but that's not really a reality for a lot of people in St. Petersburg, I would think.
Correct. When it comes to the large majority, you got to look at affordability as a whole for the city. And the only way you can do that is by having local control and affordability measures at the city level.
I'll add to, I was really surprised to see, like Jason said, with the SAIDI number, we have higher rates than Key West and a higher SAIDI number too. So Key West is more.
And remind people what SAIDI means again?
Right, the reliability, so the interruption time.
Gotcha.
So we are having less
reliability.
Less reliable power and higher rates. So that does not make sense, especially, so they'll say the argument is like we're coastal, so it doesn't compare to Winter Park. Key West is much more coastal than we are, so it doesn't quite add up.
And we should say that Duke Energy has been pretty clear about its position about this auspices of St. Pete and Clearwater perhaps taking over its utilities. In a written statement to the Florida Phoenix recently, Duke said creating a city-owned electricity utility would be, quote, enormously expensive, risky, and take years to complete. The quote continues, as we have said before, our system is not for sale. That position has not changed. Duke Energy remains committed to serving our Clearwater and St. Petersburg customers, and we look forward to working with both cities on the best path forward, which we believe is renewing the franchise agreement.
Absolutely.
When you hear something like that, what does the Dump Duke movement say back?
Absolutely. So when it comes to the actual cost of transitioning to public power, we agree it's going to be a long and hard process to actually transition. And that's because Duke is going to be fighting us the entire way, right? Now, when it comes to actual cost, you see the Clearwater Energy Alliance pushing out, it's going to put $100 billion in tax liability to residents. In reality, Clearwater's feasibility study outlined the total cost to be $572 over 30 years. That's $1 billion because they'll be taking out revenue bonds to cover that cost. And revenue bonds are not tied to the city budget or your property tax. It's only tied to your electric bill. So you, the customer, will be paying back that debt through your electricity rates, which the study was proven to show that you could have lower rates while buying out their grid.
And by the way, I should mention in the text, Jason, you have a little bit of fan mail from somebody. They don't say who they are, but he said they say they've had the chance to argue with you before over this and that you're very wise.
Great. And what I'm hearing when you say that this $1 billion is financed through the electric bill, the study that NewGen did, paid for by the city of Clearwater, what it showed was that even with that debt, even with the electricity bills paying off that debt, you would still see savings in your electric bill after just a couple of years.
First year savings.
Savings. Yes.
And let's it's not all, dump Duke people. Valerie, are you able to get in touch with Ronald Brise, as you mentioned? He's a former member of the Florida Public Service Commission. He had an op-ed in the Tampa Bay Times supporting investor-owned power utilities like Duke and opposed the municipalization of the electric grid. What did he say to you?
Well, he couldn't be here today, but he did send along this following statement to us. Ronald Brise said, having served as a state regulator, I have seen firsthand the immense technical and financial complexity required to keep Florida's lights on. A government-run utility might sound like a local solution, but the reality is far more sobering. Continuing this quote from Ronald Brise, first of all, taking over the local grid isn't just buying poles and wires. It is assuming billions in debt, losing millions in property tax revenue that currently funds our schools and first responders, and stripping away the consumer protections provided by the Public Service Commission. Continuing this quote, Clearwater and St. Pete residents deserve the full truth. A government takeover means higher debt, political interference in rate setting, and no guarantee of lower bills or better service. We should be focusing on modernization and partnership, not a costly, multi-decade legal experiment with the city's financial future. I should note that the billions in debt might not be accurate for Clearwater. That Ronald Brise touts there. Their highest estimates put the debt at less than $2 billion, and the pro-Duke group called Clearwater Energy Alliance is touting a $1.1 billion price tag, which is on the higher end of the estimate, following an estimate provided by the generally pro-investor utility Concentric study, which Duke paid for before Clearwater's feasibility study was completed. It could be accurate for St. Petersburg. Their feasibility study has not been completed. And as far as I understand, that process is a little stalled as well. The feasibility study for St. Petersburg. But I wanted to ask Marley and Jason if you could talk a little more about this idea that a government takeover means political interference and higher debt.
I'll say I didn't know who Ronald Brise was until I saw that op-ed, and then I looked him up, and he has an interesting background with Duke Energy. He actually served on the Public Service Commission at the same time that the Crystal River power plant was being, the whole debacle with the nuclear failure was being overseen. So he has some pretty favorable history with Duke Energy that is really out there. So when I saw that, his opinion was a little bit devalued in my eyes.
And we have a text from former Tampa City Councilman John Dingfelder, also hosts the show before us, Down and Dirty. He said around 2007, Tampa had an opportunity to dump TECO. TECO lobbied council and the mayor hard. Linda Salcena and Dingfelder were the only ones who wanted to explore it. The mayor and 5 other Tampa City Council members caved. We're going to try to get a call in here. Dave from Clearwater has been waiting for a while. Dave, you're on the air on WMNF with Jason and Marley from Dump Duke.
Okay, hi. Just a couple of things. I just heard somebody say overhead lines are more reliable, and that's horse hockey. We have buried lines here. It's 120 in our subdivision, 120 houses. We've never been without power more than 24 hours, except for people on the edges who have overhead lines, and they have generators, and they're going for days. Buried lines are absolutely great. I mean, I didn't realize that when I bought the place, but it's very, very reliable. Also, when Duke took over from Progress, they came in with their trucks are like twice the size of Progress Energy trucks. You could tell they're $1 million vehicles versus Progresses that are several hundred thousand. Huge increase in basic costs of them, and they're trying to make a profit on that thing. So I go into a private, private run utilities. I think is in the long run going to be much better for everybody.
Thanks for the call, Dave.
Okay, thank you.
So we got a few more text messages here. You guys are texting us big time here. Windows and doors realistically account for about a third of the air conditioning heating bill. So there are savings there. To your caller's point, recouping $60,000 is going to take a while. Not sure about that figure. Best practices in the talking about solar in the solar industry is to evaluate the roof and fully let the homeowner know the realities of what they're doing. Spoken as someone who does vote for a living and has more than 2 decades, unfortunately, these situations do exist, but they are not the rule, even in this god-awful business-friendly state. Another person from Pinellas says, we were without power for 2 weeks during the hurricanes this last time. We have backup generators which ran on propane, which came out cheaper to run than our electric with Duke. And we're going to keep going on some text here because you guys are sending us a lot. From Lake Wales on a flex bill, 2,000 square foot home, 2 people work there 12 hours a day. The bill went from $170 to $265. And yeah, those are all our emails so far. We have a few minutes left here. If you want to send your Duke Energy bill, go for it. Let us know how much you're paying. Let us know what neighborhood you're in, what size your house is. We'll try to read them before we come off air. This number to send the text is 813-433-0885. We're still taking calls. We'll try to squeeze you in. 813-239-9663. We have Jason Scott and Marley Price from the Dump Duke movement here. We're discussing their movement, which is trying to wrestle control of utilities away from Duke Energy. The summer is going to be pretty consequential for this movement here. The feasibility study is due, right? And they're supposed. Is it? I don't know.
So the RFP has not been released yet.
Okay.
St. P has been kind of slow walking this on the administration side. Now for Clearwater, they're doing the asset evaluation, and we should expect that sometime in the spring. So we could see some huge movement in Clearwater this summer.
And when you say St. Pete is slow walking on the administration side, you're talking, of course, about Mayor Ken Welch of St. Petersburg, a former employee of Florida Electric Corporation, which later became Duke Energy. And what could Ken Welch do to sort of move this process along?
Well, this RFP was approved back in August. So I'm not sure what's so complicated about the RFP, but it should have been released months ago.
And, Ken Welch is in a precarious position right now because he is going to be running for re-election. Listening to you guys, seems like, moving to that utility model where that is city-owned is pretty popular. How much have you been able to interface with City Hall? And what's your feeling there? Because he has agreed to explore it, right? He's pitched the 10-year extension. I think Tampa did a 2-year extension, and then they renegotiated again. So what's your relationship like with City Hall right now, and have you got much outreach there?
So we've been pretty, the city council members have been very open with talking with us. I'll say we're 100% opposed to any extension to our current franchise agreement. There's no reason to do a 10-year extension. And Duke right now has changed their current structure of their agreements to where their 10-year contracts, they're adding in clauses to where there's an automatic renewal to where it goes another 10 years. So a 10-year contract is really a 20-year contract, which is really the same situation we're in right now.
Okay, Marley Price from the Dump Duke movement here, along with Jason Scott. At the middle of the show and joining us, had to leave a little bit earlier, Randy Knight, city manager of Winter Park municipality, just north of Orlando there, started running its own utility 21 years ago. Thank you all so much for being on the Skinny with us today and talking about this. Can you tell people where they can follow you maybe on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow us at Dump Duke FL and on Instagram, and you can also go to our website, dumpdukefl.com.
And I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this as the months and weeks go on. Val, I know you're going to file a story. Val, thank you so much for coming back to the WMNF Tampa studio once again.
Thanks for having me back, Ray.
And thank you so much for all the calls, John in Plant City. I'm really sorry that we can't get to you here. Our time is running out. My name is Ray Rowe. I'm the editor-in-chief at Creative Loafing Tampa, also co-founder and co-host of The Skinny here on WMNF Tampa. On behalf of myself, my other co-host, Mitch Perry, from checking in from Tallahassee, Skip Sassy on the boards for us today, Anthony Madore on the phones. I do see Joellen Schilke. She sent an email that said Dump Duke, but she's going to talk about art. She's going to put it in your ear for the next hour or so. Thank you again so much for listening to WMNF Tampa. We'll see you guys next week. I think we're going to talk about the Tampa mayoral election.